In this episode, we are moving into one of the most practical skills in security management, because it is one thing to know that weaknesses exist and another thing to understand which ones truly matter. New learners often hear the words vulnerability and control deficiency used in similar conversations, and that can make the topic feel more confusing than it really is. A vulnerability usually refers to a weakness that could be exploited in a system, process, application, device, or environment, while a control deficiency points to a problem in the safeguards that are supposed to prevent, detect, or correct harm. That distinction matters because security leaders are not just hunting for technical flaws. They are trying to understand where protection is weak, why it is weak, what business impact could follow, and how to decide what deserves attention first. Good analysis turns raw findings into decisions. Without that step, organizations can collect endless reports and still miss the issues that create the greatest real-world danger. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to start is to picture a vulnerability as an opening and a control deficiency as a failure in the organization's protective posture around that opening. If a server has outdated software with a known weakness, that is a vulnerability because something about the system could allow misuse or unauthorized access. If the company also lacks a strong patch process, or if nobody is responsible for verifying whether important systems are updated on time, that points to a control deficiency because the protective process around the weakness is not working as intended. Sometimes the two appear together, and sometimes they appear separately. A company may have few obvious technical flaws at a given moment, but still have serious control deficiencies in monitoring, approval, ownership, or review. On the other hand, a company may have decent governance on paper, yet still carry technical vulnerabilities because the environment changes faster than the control process can keep up. The analysis process helps separate those conditions so leaders can see not just what is wrong, but also why it keeps happening. That is why analysis matters more than simple discovery. Many organizations can generate findings, but not all of them are equally good at understanding what the findings mean. A beginner may assume that if a weakness is found, the right answer is always to fix it as fast as possible. In real organizations, however, that is not always practical or even necessary in the same way for every issue. Some weaknesses sit in isolated systems with little exposure, while others affect core business processes, sensitive data, or systems that are constantly reachable and heavily relied upon. Security management depends on context because limited time and limited resources force people to make choices. If analysis is weak, organizations often chase the loudest issue, the newest issue, or the most dramatic-looking report, while more important weaknesses remain in place. Good vulnerability and control deficiency analysis creates discipline. It helps security managers explain which issues create real business risk, which ones are being managed acceptably for now, and which ones reflect a deeper control problem that will keep generating trouble until the underlying process improves. Before analyzing any weakness, a security manager needs a basic understanding of what the organization is trying to protect and how the business actually operates. That may sound obvious, but it is one of the most common gaps in weak analysis. A serious flaw in a low-value test environment may deserve attention, but it is not the same as a moderate flaw in a system that supports payroll, customer transactions, financial reporting, patient data, or operational continuity. Analysis becomes much more useful when it begins with asset importance, data sensitivity, business dependency, and how broadly the affected system is connected to other systems. A weakness in an isolated internal tool may not have the same urgency as a weakness in a public-facing application tied to identity, money movement, or regulated information. This is why mature security teams do not analyze findings in a vacuum. They ask what the asset does, who depends on it, how exposed it is, what would happen if it failed or was misused, and whether the weakness could serve as a path into something even more important. Context is what transforms a technical observation into a meaningful security judgment. Weaknesses can be identified through many channels, and good analysis often brings those channels together instead of relying on only one source. Technical reviews may reveal outdated software, insecure configurations, excessive privileges, or known flaws in applications and infrastructure. Audits may uncover process failures, missing approvals, poor segregation of duties, or inconsistent documentation that indicates a control is not functioning reliably. Incident reviews may reveal that an issue was technically visible long before an event occurred, but nobody connected the dots or acted on the warning signs. Employees may report confusing processes that encourage shortcuts, which can point to a control deficiency even before a formal incident happens. Vendor reviews may expose inherited risk where third parties are not meeting the expected security standard. When all of these observations are viewed together, the analysis becomes stronger because it shows whether the organization is facing a one-time weakness, a recurring pattern, or a broader management issue. Good security leaders learn to see findings not as isolated facts, but as clues about the health of the environment as a whole. When conducting vulnerability analysis specifically, the first question is not simply whether a weakness exists, but how that weakness could realistically be abused. That means thinking about exposure, exploitability, access, and likely consequences. Is the vulnerable system reachable from the internet, or is it only available in a tightly limited internal segment? Does exploiting the weakness require special knowledge, unusual timing, or credentials that are already well protected, or is it the kind of weakness that attackers commonly target at scale? Is there sensitive data on the system, or does the system have trusted connections that could allow movement into more critical areas? These questions matter because the same technical flaw can represent very different levels of risk in different environments. Good analysis also considers compensating protections. A weakness might look severe in isolation, but its real danger may be reduced by strong segmentation, limited privileges, close monitoring, or other controls already in place. That does not make the weakness disappear, but it does help the organization judge it more accurately instead of treating every technical problem as equally urgent. Control deficiency analysis asks a somewhat different set of questions because it is concerned with whether the protective system around a risk is well designed and operating effectively. A control may exist on paper but fail in practice because ownership is unclear, execution is inconsistent, evidence is weak, or the process depends too heavily on memory and goodwill. In some cases, the design itself is flawed. A review may be scheduled too rarely. A monitoring process may cover only part of the environment, or an approval step may not include the right stakeholder to make a sound decision. In other cases, the design is reasonable, but the operation is weak. People may skip steps when work becomes busy, managers may approve changes without real review, or exceptions may pile up until the control stops being meaningful. Good analysis looks for both design problems and operating problems, because fixing only one side can leave the organization exposed. A process that is well written but poorly followed is still weak, and a process that is consistently followed but badly designed may simply deliver the wrong kind of protection. One of the most important lessons for beginners is that vulnerabilities and control deficiencies often reinforce each other. A critical weakness in a system may be serious, but it becomes far more dangerous when the organization also has poor asset tracking, weak monitoring, unclear ownership, and slow remediation practices. In that case, the technical flaw is only part of the story. The deeper issue is that the organization's control environment is not mature enough to identify, prioritize, and resolve weaknesses consistently. The reverse can also happen. A control deficiency may seem administrative or procedural at first, but it can quietly create the conditions for multiple future vulnerabilities to go unnoticed. For example, if an organization lacks a reliable process for reviewing access rights, then excessive permissions may accumulate across many systems over time. Each one may not look dramatic by itself, but together they form a broad weakness in the environment. This is why strong analysis looks beyond the specific finding in front of the team and asks whether the issue reveals a recurring pattern, a governance gap, or a breakdown in accountability that extends further than the single observed case. Prioritization is where the quality of analysis becomes especially visible. Many teams receive long lists of findings, but the real challenge is deciding what should be addressed first and why. Beginners sometimes rely too heavily on labels such as critical, high, medium, or low without understanding how those labels were assigned. Those categories can be useful, but they are not a substitute for judgment. A weakness rated high in a generic model may be less urgent in a tightly controlled environment than a moderate issue affecting a system that supports a critical business process with poor visibility and broad access. Control deficiencies must also be prioritized based on their reach. A small documentation gap may matter less than a broken review process that affects every privileged account in the company. Good prioritization brings together business importance, likelihood of misuse, ease of exploitation, exposure level, existing safeguards, and operational consequences. It also requires honesty about capacity. An organization that tries to declare everything urgent often ends up slowing itself down and making weaker decisions across the board. Clear documentation is another essential part of sound analysis because leaders cannot act effectively on vague statements. A good finding description explains what was observed, where it was observed, why it matters, and what kind of risk could result if the issue remains unresolved. That means the analysis should be specific enough to support action without drowning decision-makers in unnecessary technical detail. If the issue is a vulnerability, the documentation should explain the affected asset, the type of weakness, the level of exposure, and the likely path of misuse in plain business language. If the issue is a control deficiency, the documentation should describe what the control was supposed to do, how its design or operation fell short, and what broader consequence could follow from that weakness. Strong documentation also distinguishes fact from assumption. It should state what is known, what has been inferred reasonably, and where more validation may still be needed. When documentation is weak, issues become easy to dismiss, hard to compare, and difficult to assign to the right owner for meaningful follow-through. Ownership and collaboration matter because analysis does not happen in a vacuum and remediation rarely belongs to security alone. Security teams may identify or help interpret a weakness, but system owners, process owners, business leaders, and technology teams often have the practical knowledge needed to judge operational impact and implement a realistic response. A system administrator may understand dependency issues that affect patch timing. A business manager may know that a change window is limited because the process supports revenue, patient care, or legal obligations. An audit or risk professional may recognize that a local issue actually reflects a wider process failure across multiple departments. Good analysis benefits from these perspectives because it becomes more grounded in reality and less likely to recommend fixes that look clean on paper but fail during execution. Collaboration also improves accountability. When owners participate in the analysis, they are more likely to understand the reasoning behind the priority, the urgency of the issue, and the business case for addressing it. Security leadership becomes more effective when it facilitates informed decisions rather than simply handing down findings from a distance. A simple example can make the difference between the two kinds of analysis easier to understand. Imagine a company that operates a customer portal used for account access, billing information, and support requests. During a review, the team discovers that one server supporting the portal is running software that has a known weakness and is several updates behind. That is a vulnerability because the system has a technical condition that could be exploited. As the team looks deeper, it discovers something else. Patching for internet-facing systems is supposed to happen monthly, but there is no reliable inventory of what systems are public, and no one regularly verifies whether the process was completed. That is a control deficiency because the patch management control is not operating effectively. The technical flaw needs attention, but the broader lesson is even more important. If the control deficiency is not corrected, another internet-facing system may soon fall behind in the same way. Good analysis therefore addresses both the immediate weakness and the management problem that allowed it to persist. Another beginner misconception is that analysis ends once a finding is written down and assigned. In reality, that is only the midpoint of the work. Effective organizations revisit findings to see whether the original judgment still holds, whether the environment has changed, and whether repeated issues suggest the presence of a larger structural weakness. A vulnerability that seemed manageable last month may become urgent if a system is exposed more broadly, if a new attack trend emerges, or if a critical business process is moved onto the affected platform. A control deficiency that looked narrow may prove systemic when similar failures appear in related departments or technologies. Trend analysis is useful here because repeated issues often tell a more important story than a single isolated finding. If the same kinds of weaknesses keep appearing, the organization may not have a discovery problem at all. It may have a governance, ownership, staffing, or process maturity problem. Good security managers pay attention to that pattern because recurring weaknesses often represent the most meaningful opportunity for long-term improvement. At a deeper level, vulnerability and control deficiency analysis supports one of the central goals of security management, which is helping the organization make better decisions under real-world constraints. Every organization has more weaknesses than it can address instantly, and every team must balance risk reduction against cost, time, operational stability, and business priorities. That reality does not mean leaders should become passive or careless. It means they need a disciplined method for understanding where the true exposure lies and which responses are most sensible. Strong analysis prevents both overreaction and underreaction. It keeps the organization from wasting energy on findings that sound alarming but have limited practical impact, while also making sure serious systemic weaknesses are not hidden inside routine paperwork or generic scoring labels. For a new learner, this is an important mindset shift. The goal is not to become a collector of flaws. The goal is to become a thoughtful interpreter of weakness, context, and consequence so that the organization can act with clarity instead of confusion. By the end of this discussion, the topic should feel much more structured and much less intimidating. A vulnerability is a weakness that could be exploited, while a control deficiency is a weakness in the system of safeguards meant to manage risk. Sometimes they appear separately, but often they interact and amplify each other in ways that matter greatly to the business. Conducting sound analysis means understanding the asset, the exposure, the likely path of misuse, the quality of existing controls, and the operational reality of fixing the issue. It also means documenting findings clearly, involving the right owners, and looking for patterns that reveal deeper problems beneath individual observations. When this work is done well, the organization gains more than a list of problems. It gains a clearer picture of where risk is really building, why it is building, and how to respond in a way that improves security over time rather than simply reacting to the latest report.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.